Now we want to look at the chapter that deals with emotions. And I think this is a critical chapter in this book because, as I've mentioned in previous slide decks, we are social, emotional, sensory beings. And, you know, the emotion isn't always positive. Sometimes the emotion is negative. But looking at how companies are now using emotional marketing to connect their products with emotions and why that's so important and how, as marketers, we can take advantage of the emotional nature of human beings is really critical. So pay attention in this chapter and make sure you read it. I'm going to go over the main concepts in this slide deck, but I really think you should read some of the great examples he gives. So research studies consistently show that we rely on our emotions, certainly, you know, harkening back to that comment I made on the previous slide that we are emotional beings, rather than the information that is supplied to us regarding brands, and that we use those emotions. We use how that brand makes us feel. We use that emotion to make brand decisions, and that emotional responses to ads are much more influential in our decisions to buy than the actual content of the ad, and sometimes almost to the exclusion of what the features and benefits are. You know, how does that make us feel? What do we think about that brand? What does the emotion that brand brings about in us? So this is some additional information that I dug up when I was looking at Psychology Today. The piece was called "The Consumer's Mind: How Emotions Influence What We Buy," which I thought was very interesting. And one of the things that they state in this article is that positive emotion is actually more important than trust. That if we have a positive emotion, that is more important than us trusting the brand. And I think they kind of go hand in hand. When I think of a positive emotion, I think I get that positive emotion, you know, partially because I trust the brand. But the article states that you can actually not have complete trust in a brand, but if you still have a positive emotion towards them, you'll continue to buy that brand. And that emotion wins out every time over a brand that we have no emotion or no attachment to. And that brand personalities and their stories, which we'll talk about stories in Chapter 6, that brand personalities and the stories, if we can relate to that story somehow, if there's something in that story or there's something about that story that makes us feel something, we will oftentimes get a better impression or better feeling for that brand. And you know, I think you should think about which brands do you have an emotional attachment to. You know, are there brands that you feel go beyond the flavor now or the quality? My sister is an Apple brand loyalist from way back, and she's never going to change. I mean, that is just how she feels. And you know, you can tell her how good another brand is, but she has this emotional attachment now to that brand. And it's not just trust, because there have been times when I don't think she could trust Apple, but she certainly has a very strong attachment to it. So what are the brands that you feel an attachment to? So I really like this concept that's in this chapter. It's from Peter Noel Murray, and he states that we really need to stop looking at the consumer in relationship to our product, because that's a very me approach, and we need to look at the consumer through the lens of the emotion that our product presents in them. And I like the idea of it. Personally, I think being concerned with your consumer and seeing it from your consumer's perspective is critical. The 360 view of the consumer now is almost one of the more important things to worry about than how they see or what they think of your brand or what they think of your product, for that matter. So I do think that the consumer has to be considered here. And if research bears out that the emotion is much more important than the product, then I guess we have to concern ourselves with what the emotion does for us. I don't know. You'll have to decide if you agree. You know, do you bond with the emotion of a brand or a product itself? And do you feel that the brands that are doing well are the ones that concern themselves with the view from the consumer's side and not from their side? So as you get into the meat of this chapter, what he ends up telling you here is that not all emotions are created equal. That some emotions rank higher in the ability to drive a consumer to buy than other emotions. And so what he does is he begins to rank the emotions as far as if you have the ability to attach yourself to this particular concept, this would be a better concept than some others. So I've posted I posted a personal commercial that I happen to like, that I think does drive the right emotion, that does drive a wonderful emotion. It's really done. It makes you feel something. It makes you connect. And it's not overly branded. So I think if you watch this commercial, this has nothing to do with the book. It just drives the point of the book home. And the way he does it is he lists the 4 primary emotions. And he says, happiness trumps sadness. If you have an opportunity in an ad to go after happiness, you should. Awe, right? Awe trumps surprise. If you can awe me versus surprise me, that will work even better. Anger, you know, it's definitely down there, but it's not first or second, it's third. But it is better than disgust. So if you can anger me, get me to feel some kind of anger, that's better than disgust. And I think fear has to be listed as a 5th. He doesn't really completely say that, but if you look at some of the financial ads, the ones that are successful are the ones that get you thinking about, you know, how secure, how safe are you, and add a little tiny bit of fear. So here's a couple of the emotional best practices that he happens to mention in the chapter. And the first of those is that awe or wonder or amazement, you know, from knowledge, beauty, anything like that, is something that will get shared. And as we mentioned earlier, this is how to make something contagious, right? How to get more people to know about it and how to get people to share it. And one of the things he said people share is they share awe or wonder. And I agree with that. You know, I think I took a look at some of the things that I've shared, and I think that there is some logic to this. This is something that you do share because it's not something you see all the time. In addition to the fact, of course, that we share things that are useful, like Ken's corn shucking video, and things that bring social currency to us, you know, that make us somehow look better. And so I posted a little piece that I saw from Red Bull. I think it's probably Ian Walsh, and it's pretty amazing. So you look at that, and that it's very awe-inspiring. And then he says, you know, if you can't awe me, then surprise me. You know, do something unexpected or solve a mystery. And he happens to mention Denise Grady's The Cough. Because Denise Grady's information is proprietary, I can't use it. But what I've shared here for you is a Robitussin commercial that basically uses this concept in it. And it shows how far your cough actually spreads. And so she did this kind of odd medical piece, and it got shared millions of times, and it was because she was able to show how far your cough actually spreads when when you think you're containing it within your hand. So you can watch the commercial and you'll get a chance to see that concept in action. So that was a story that he told in this particular chapter to show that, you know, if you can't find awe or wonder or amazement, surprise me. So do we share all emotions, or is it just some? For some of us, we do share everything because we're just, you know, socially very active. But for others, we're very specific with what we share. And a lot of times we share awe because they've done some research to figure out why do we share certain emotions over others. We share awe because it enhances our social currency. We like to show somebody, hey, I saw this great piece, and, you know, I thought you would find it interesting, and, hey, isn't that great that I found it? Sadness, we tend not to share, believe it or not. We don't usually share sadness. And anger and anxiety, believe it or not, we share that. If something makes us feel a lot of angst, like we should have done something specific to protect our money or something like that, we may pass that along. We definitely share happiness. And we share humor, but you have to be really careful with humor because it can be very risky, especially in global markets. What we think is very funny here may not be seen as funny in some other cultures. And if you've ever watched Japanese TV and watched some of the commercials, it's just insanity. But, you know, the humor is not necessarily something that it translates globally very well. So you have to be very careful with sharing humor. And something that you may think is funny may be politically incorrect to somebody else. So the next part of this chapter that he talks about is arousal a catalyst? And I think of this more like timing, right? Making sure that somebody sees the ad or you share that emotion at a time of time, you know, what the timing is right, I think is very important. So you're more likely to act if you're in a state or in a timing where it just makes sense for you to potentially pick that product up. So he indicates that arousal, being in a state of arousal, is just as important as the emotion and probably more important than the product. I think of it as you have to have a need. You know, you're not going to go out and buy a piece just because there's a cute ad on it. I think you have to have a need. And I think you should, if you get a chance, watch out for the United Airlines and the David's guitar story that's in that chapter. You know, information is not enough. You need to see the emotion behind the information. And the example is the anti-smoking ads. By just telling people to quit smoking because it's bad for their health, it just isn't going to do anything. It's been proven that that doesn't work. Somehow you have to drive home an emotion. You have to make people feel something. And making the mundane emotional, you know, Sharpie, if you know Sharpie, they make the black pens that we see a lot in warehouses and in supply chains. You know, Sharpie came out with an entire program that said write out loud, you know, use your Sharpie for the emotions of the moment. And they captured what people were using their Sharpie for, you know, asking someone to marry them, quitting their job. You know, they wrote it on a piece of paper with a Sharpie, and so they used it to convince people that this is an emotion that is attached to the Sharpie. And I think they did an absolutely great job. And Google has a commercial called Parisian Love. If you want to go in and you want to watch it, you can. And these are the types of things that you need to do. You need to somehow attach yourself to an emotion, get your product to be thought of as adding to that. So again, this isn't necessarily part of what's in the book, but it drives home some of the points that he's making of Victoria's Secrets and the perfect body, right? They had an ad out that was called Victoria's Secret's The Perfect Body, and every single woman in there looked like Tom Brady's wife. And they said that this was the perfect body. They caught a lot of flack. Now, a lot of people shared that ad, but they didn't share it necessarily for the reason of prompting people to go out and buy Victoria's Secret. Quite to the opposite. It aroused people and got them angry and fired up, and that's why they shared it. And they shared it because they were angry with Victoria's Secret for saying that the only body that's perfect is one that's tall, thin, lean, and, you know, that this isn't necessarily the only perfect body. Dove saw this and said, well, we're going to capitalize on this negative press that Victoria's Secret's getting, and they came out with one, you know, that's called The Perfect Body, and it shows all of these different body types. And they said, you know, every body is the perfect body. And it caused a type of emotion to be attached to Dove that's quite different than the one that's attached to Victoria's Secret. And then I've posted a little commercial there that you can see around an ad that says run like a girl, and it definitely taps into an emotion there. And that's been shared many, many, many times by people, so obviously this is something that's a catalyst. And then physical arousal is the second topic that he talks about, and he says, you know, movement causes sharing. Get me when I'm fired up. Get me when I'm angry. Get me when I'm emotional. Get me when I'm happy. And that's why, if you take it to the next step, that's why the Dove ad did so well and the Victoria's Secret ad did so poorly. And then place the ad with where there's peak arousal and activities that, you know, in the middle of a game show when somebody's just on the brink of winning, and you know you're waiting to find out in the middle of a football game when you're waiting in the fourth quarter to see what's going on. You know, when you're on the edge of your seat waiting to see an outcome, that's when you're the most fired up, and that's when the ad will do the most. So to me, back to timing, right? Make sure you know your timing on your ads. If you get a chance, I'd like you to watch this ad. It's called He Lies. I think it's an excellent ad to show emotional advertising. And then tell me if you think it worked. I mentioned that using humor is something that you can do in your advertising to elicit an emotion, but you have to be careful because it isn't always something that translates very well. So I've posted a piece here that's from Kmart. I think it's pretty funny, but you may not, so we'll see. It can be risky, right? But this is something that Kmart has been trying to change their image, and to change their image, they need to change the emotion associated with their image. And so they're trying to look hipper and younger and more with it. So if you get a chance, you can watch this ad and tell me what you think.